Hello and welcome. It's hard to believe this is the 10th episode in the LinkedIn Live Lounge, our learning lounge with Attensi. And I'm super happy to say we have a returning guest and great friend. James, thank you. This is the second time we've put you in the hot seat. And obviously today we're going to talk about something very different to what we've previously talked about. But if anybody would like to see any of the previous episodes, you can head over to our YouTube channel or my LinkedIn page at Dean Humphrey, and you'll be able to catch all of our previous recordings. James, as I said, it's great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
Being here. And no great surprises. So a subject that's been talked about a lot for some time now, and I think you can probably guess what that's going to be. So today we're going to talk about AI, but we're going to talk about more practical kind of application and maybe even parts of wisdom on our views. Maybe
if we have time.
We could try, right? We could certainly try. So, James, the whole world seems to be losing its mind a little bit when it comes to AI, I think it's fair to say. But why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think there's been there's been developments definitely over the last little bit. I'd kind of box them into, let's say, like technical developments, and then there's obviously like the venture capital investment that's going into this space right now. But in the technical side, there's like three main reasons why it's really advanced or people are paying more attention. So there's deep learning. So deep learning is the tech that powers image recognition, classification, and then generation of images too. And for context, 10 years ago, we struggled to even recognize an image. And now with advancements in the types of algorithms we're using in the models, we're not only able to recognize images, but we can actually generate them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very visual application of AI. So I think a lot of people are paying more attention to that particularly.
Yeah.
We also have seen advances in computing power. So computing power is very necessary to actually power those algorithms to give more accurate outputs, and the speed at which they do that is important. One interesting tidbit here is that that advances in computing power is actually tied to the gaming industry a little bit. So gaming industry started developing what are called GPUs, so graphics processing units, and that is powering better gameplay, richer graphics, richer detail. And it just turns out that those specific processing units are actually really good at processing algorithms and models. So that's actually influenced some of the development there. And then the last thing is data sets. So we have way more access to data than we ever have before. We spend all of our lives online, and all of that data is now being used to train and make algorithms smarter.
So if I was going to really simplify it, which I do a lot because I need to, we're talking advancement in computer technology, so more powerful computing, more powerful computers.
Yeah.
And obviously we, as you probably said in simple terms enough, that we have more data points, we have more information readily available.
Correct.
Is that a fair enough simplification?
Yeah, very much.
Brilliant.
Very much.
So AI's actually been around for a lot longer than I realised. Much more than just the last few years. Is that right?
Yeah, it's and that's kind of cool to think about in the terms of where we are right now with the technology. So a lot of new technologies come to market and go through these things called hype cycles. So one company that does a really good job of this, which we may even see a visual of, is Gartner. So Gartner has this thing called the new technology hype curve, I believe. I might have gotten that wrong, but it's essentially a measure of where technologies sit relative to public opinion and whether they are actually bringing like utility to the business world or whether they're just artificially inflated. So in terms of AI, Gartner is putting it right at the top of this peak where they kind of forecast that it's going to fall off the peak and then enter what's called this trough of disillusionment, where it'll spend a few years or however many years before it actually becomes useful to the world. So it's definitely interesting to look at that, but in the context of it being around for a lot longer, I think a lot of people don't realize that AI has been around since the 50s or even the 60s, and the first applications of it actually came in the 70s. And so it's actually been through quite a few different hype cycles of public opinion and what it will deliver before it's reached where it is today. And I'm not saying that Gartner is wrong with what they're doing, but I think it's interesting to look at it in the bigger picture and context.
Yeah, this is interesting, but I've got all the questions. First one is trough of what?
Trough of disillusionment.
Maybe it's something from World of Warcraft.
Yeah, it took me a while to say
fantastic.
that.
And you mentioned since the 1950s.
Yeah.
So obviously, given technology and computing power has moved along so much, let alone from the 50s. What were we seeing? What was AI doing in the 50s, or what was being worked on at least?
It was narrow applications of AI on specific problems which required not a lot of computational power to actually put out. So closed environments where, let's say, like an AI robot had to navigate around a group of blocks to reach the other side, and those blocks could be rearranged in a certain way, and so it would have to navigate that. There were even some early kind of like translation tools that AI was doing. But essentially what happened is that everybody kind of looked at this new technology as if it was going to be the stepping stone to flying cars and Marty McFly's hoverboard, skateboard. But when those technological breakthroughs didn't happen, people kind of lost interest and said, oh, well, that's actually not what it's supposed to be.
Okay, right. Yeah. So hence why I don't have my flying car.
Exactly.
Or flying skateboard.
You don't have your flying car.
It's actually 9 years late, I think I got told. Is that right?
That is correct. Back to the Future 2 was released in 1989, but it was forecasting a future in 2015 where there were a whole bunch of flying and everything.
And I guess that kind of relates back to, again, not wanting to oversimplify, but what you were just speaking to around the kind of, again, simplification, but peaks and troughs of technological trends almost.
Yeah.
That we're not seeing what we thought we'd see, and therefore it dies down a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's where Gartner is kind of looking at where it's going to come in, because we're in this interesting place where people do now see or do think that we might see applications of AI which are much more advanced than we're actually going to get.
Yeah.
And if we don't get those, then public opinion may fall off. But it's moving so quickly that it's
does make a lot of sense. Make a lot of sense. People are throwing their toys out of the pram because they haven't got their flying skateboard.
I want my flying car.
Anyway, let's move along. Brilliant, thank you. So just change the direction ever so slightly. So, James, we obviously work very closely in the learning and development world and a cross-section of people inside learning and development. Is it something that L&D should be fearful of at the moment?
I think, again, with like the amount of time now, like we have to be realistic. With the amount of time that AI has been in the public sphere, I think people are now looking at it not as though it's this Terminator level technology that's going to take over the world, but we're now thinking about it more realistically. And so, which I think is great, because now we're having more kind of like technical discussions about what it's going to be and where it's going to come into the business. So one example I think I have specific to L&D is that I was having a conversation with an L&D manager at a hotel recently, and I showed him our suite of AI tools, and at the end of it, he didn't kind of immediately think about like, where is this AI tool going to impact me right now today in my business, but instead he asked about hiring. He asked, what are the types of skills or proficiencies that I am going to need as a hiring manager to bring into my team so that I can make use of this technology in the future. And I think that is a really good example of where L&D teams should be today and how they should be thinking about this tech. So for example, I'm not even sure this might predate my professional career, but thinking back to maybe 15, 20 years ago, like Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, Adobe, like those were not tools that people talked about openly on resumes, right? They weren't kind of standard practice. But now when you look at the skills sections on resumes, you see proficiency in Excel, proficiency in PowerPoint, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that in a very near future, we're going to start to see proficiency in prompt writing or proficiency in GPT or whatever the kind of the baseline AI tech is that takes hold.
I think that makes a hell of a lot of sense. I think, it would have been many years ago when being able to use Excel scared a lot of people. Like, I know a little bit, but actually what you've just said is seeing prompt writing, almost that parallel to those. It's somewhat of a given skill.
It's just like it's a productivity tool, right? At the end of the day, Excel makes forecasting easier, makes a whole lot of stuff easier, but it's productivity or creativity. And that's really what ChatGPT is, for example.
Makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of information in what you've just sort of talked about, James. great, and I'm sure there'll be bits in there that people will relate to, or maybe stuff that people have not thought of before. But in your opinion, if I wanted to learn more, where do I start? Where do I go?
Yeah, it's a great question. Personally, I think there's so much out there right now that it can feel like you might get bogged down if you try to just tackle everything. But I would recommend starting with just like a baseline knowledge, like get up to speed on the different types of algorithms that are out there, specifically the types of data that are used to train those models, because that will inform kind of like your privacy and your data strategy, and then also educate yourself on the types of problems that AI can solve, because that'll narrow your focus on, the stuff that's actually real. In terms of, there's a bunch of different ways you can go, but there's online courses. A lot of this information is just readily available online. Here at Attensi, we actually use our own product to upskill our teams on that baseline level of knowledge. So we're using a product called Attensi Skills to kind of give a background, algorithms, models, how they're built. But then most importantly, we're looking at practicing conversations with customers using avatars and scenarios that have the conversation structured around like, what is our data privacy policy? Like, how do we train our models? Like, where's my data being processed? And that's the stuff that matters
of course,
in customer conversations, but it'll be different depending on the business.
Yeah, it makes sense. And obviously, by doing that research, you can then maybe better match what you need to the issues you've got, or the objectives that you want.
It's a great point. I think that would be another place where you could go, because again, there's so many types of applications out there. But if I was trying to learn about the market, I would look maybe at the types of problems that I have in the business right now. So for example, looking at where there's a lot of manual data handling, a lot of time being spent on repetitive tasks. And so, for example, let's say you were looking at completion data on a report, right? For how many people have trained in X type of skill or module. Then you need to create graphs based on that data. That can take time. So look for a company that solves that problem, talk to them, learn from them, and then decide for yourself if you want to bring it into business.
I guess that's just, again, simplified, brilliant advice is pick up the phone. And
pick up the phone.
Like we'd always advocate it, right? That if you've got an issue, actually just have a conversation with us and see if we can match our product or solution or our AI-powered tools to that.
Exactly.
Probably the easiest thing to do as well at times as well. Fantastic. So we talk about enhancements. We've probably talked about enhancements today, and we talk about it all the time. But what are some examples how you've maybe done that with customers, with our existing customers?
Yeah.
Or even future customers? Yeah,
totally. I think with going along the line of like looking at problems in a business, I think it makes sense to look at it from a problem aspect. And the most successful applications of Attensi's AI has always been, in my world, kind of with similar problems. So I work with hotels day in and day out. So I'm helping them adopt game-based training. And in the UK specifically, there's a lot of independently owned hotels. So 5 to 20 locations, let's say. And for businesses that size, they'll typically have an L&D team of about 3 to 4 people. So they're somewhat limited in the sense of what type of projects they can take on at any one time, because they are a smaller team.
Time constraints, right?
Time constraints. Like they also have to train people in person. Like there's a lot that happens for that team. So when it comes down to, let's say, building content or building like custom or bespoke training content, that is invariably better than using something generic, something like a library. But oftentimes we just see that they just don't have the resources or maybe even the budget to actually build it themselves. So Attensi has this really cool tool inside of our creator platform where you can drag in a PDF, so an existing training document or material, and we can use generative AI to scan the document and then produce a game-based learning module as a result. And it's really interesting to see because oftentimes we're taking these like 20-page documents and then putting them through AI and spitting out this like really interactive, engaging, game-based learning that's taking like 3 to 4 minutes to do. And so you see visually and from the output that this is something AI can help with.
Of course, I've seen the product, but I could say again, ex-retail hospitality background. God, I wish I'd had a tool like that many years ago. And
yeah, we'll deliver it with your flying skateboard.
Yeah, please. But well, it's obviously beat the flying skateboard because it's a real thing. Yeah. But I think for our friends in L&D to kind of visualize that manual, that set of PDFs effectively being dropped into what almost like a machine.
Yeah.
And coming out with bespoke, engaging, gamified content, it's absolutely priceless. And linking to your point, you did so well, that, and we see that a lot. The L&D team is very powerful but very small, and time constraint being the biggest thing. Yeah. I think for me, obviously, AI really enhances people's current job and reduces time very often.
Yeah, correct.
So just touching on another product. So looking at Attensi's Real Talk, how would you describe it? How is that different to everything else you've just talked about?
Yeah, totally. Well, so Real Talk is an AI product. So I think it, again, makes sense to maybe look at the problem first. So anyone who's been a leader or has been in a leadership position knows that there are certain conversations that you have to have with your team that are harder than others. So you've got
both good and bad. Right?
Both good and bad. You've got things like performance management. You've got, like what am I doing with my career? You've got mentorship. You've got conflict resolution. Like these are types of conversations that are difficult to have, and so typically you'll be trained on those. So what businesses will do is they'll have a framework for what good looks like for each of those conversations, and then they might have role plays or in-person events where you can practice that type of skill before you actually go out and do it with your team. But I think at the end of the day, you're not really getting effective at those types of conversations until you're actually doing them. You're actually doing them with real people, real teams, etc. And that process can take months, it can take years. I mean, it takes a long time to be a really good leader.
Yeah,
so that's where Real Talk comes in. So Real Talk allows anybody with a leadership position or anyone really in kind of like a soft skills type role to practice those types of conversations with an AI-powered avatar so that they can get those repetitions in and get effective quicker. One question that I think comes up quite a bit when we show it or when we talk about it is where it sits in kind of the larger market in terms of like, is this a chatbot? Is it not a chatbot? So it's kind of interesting to look at like where chatbots sit today. So first level I'd say is, let's say a chatbot that you would go on a website, like a retail website for. So if I go to a clothing distributor, I might interact with the chatbot that comes up in the bottom right corner, put in my order number, and then I'd have a status fed back to me. So that's what's called a rule-based system. So you recognize the text and spit back out information based on a rule. But if you ask that chatbot to say like, what is the, what's the growth rate in movie theaters in the UK, it's not going to have any idea what to say.
Doesn't have that data.
It doesn't have that data. It doesn't have that ability to recognize that. So then you move up to the second level, which is ChatGPT, which is powered by a large language model. What that's doing is it's doing sentiment analysis on whatever you're inputting and then determining what you're really looking for there. So that's why you can put, a question into ChatGPT and then you're getting, all this data, trends, kind of like all of the things that it thinks you might want. Now, doing that is really useful for getting data. It's really useful for getting information, but when you're thinking about like a conversation, ChatGPT definitely still sounds robotic. It sounds like a machine. And that's where Real Talk would be different. So what Real Talk does is it adds a layer on top of ChatGPT that is converting those outputs into something that feels human. And the way that we do that is by creating characters and narratives and storylines. So for example, one of the narratives that we built is a woman who's been working at a cafe for about 6 months. You've noticed that her performance is starting to decrease. You don't really know why, and you're using Real Talk in order to practice how you would speak to her in the real life setting to determine the problem, have her recognize the impact, and then find a solution.
Well, obviously the difference between that kind of ChatGPT model is that there's a response based on your reply. That's the right way to put it.
Yeah, exactly.
Will change accordingly.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like a
much less robotic and more realistic.
Exactly. So it's a live conversation that you're having with an AI algorithm, which is wild to say.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is that since it is AI and since it is pulling from this really large data set of possible answers and responses, every time you do it is different. So every time you have that conversation, it's completely unique and different.
It's not a fancy chat GPT.
It is a very fancy chat GPT, but no, it is different in the sense that we have a proprietary technology on top of it that is crafting that narrative and that storyline. And I'd say what makes it unique in the market is the fact that we are building those narratives. We're building those characters using years of expertise and data and experience in training, in conversations, to build the most effective narrative that's going to drive impact, behavior change.
Really amazing. I have a final question.
Please.
It's probably the most serious question. So, along with people viewing, I've been massively let down by Doc Brown and Marty McFly. I've not got a flying DeLorean or even a hovering skateboard.
Yeah.
But in your personal opinion, James, and obviously given what you do here at Attensi and your involvement with AI, etc., what does the future look like? Do you think?
I think that even like if you'd asked me 6 months ago or a year ago, I probably would have had a more conservative response. But seeing how quickly things have moved, especially in the context of like 10 years ago, we couldn't even recognize an image, and now we're generating movies and videos, full kind of like digital media using AI. I personally think that things are going to move faster than we think, and we're going to start to see applications that really that are really extraordinary much quicker than we expect.
Amazing. James, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Time round.
Yes, back at the lounge.
Great to have you here. Of course, you can rewatch this on record. You'll be able to view it on our YouTube channel or head over to my profile page here on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or any thoughts, or you do want to discuss with us how our AI-powered tools could potentially help solve some of your current problems in the learning world, please do reach out and connect. We'd love to show you more, put you in the driving seat of some of our solutions. But thanks for now, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for showing me your AI offering. I'm actually very interested in PDF to skills. Do you build that yourself or work with a third-party provider? Thanks. Listen, it looks great, but we're not comfortable with you using this with our data. If I'm going to be uploading PDFs, I don't want those being used to train your model. I am sure that companies like OpenAI are using our data to make their systems better. Okay, so where exactly is my data processed then? So, how do I know these third-party providers are keeping my data safe? Well, I'll certainly be getting legal involved to look over that. Out of curiosity, are you developing your own AI? Fascinating. I'd love to learn more. Sure.